Welcome back. Welcome back to the Future Forum 2021, State Societies and People in the Digital Age. Yeah, and this is where we're shaping the global transformation. Katrin Lawrence is back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me quickly this morning in the studio. I'm glad to see you again, Natasha, and glad to see, of course, everyone who's out there on the screens.
Yeah, and we would love to see even more faces, but we do actually get to see some faces. So lovely that you're back with us. And today's going to be a really exciting day. It's a long day, but I think most of the days have been long so far. Katrin, have you actually slept?
Just a little bit, but I've really had the time to listen into all that was offered. I basically went to all side event slots. I went, of course, to the core program. And I was really amazed to see how many people were there, how lively we had discussions, and how it really worked out that we had people from all over the world joining in this one time slot between 12:30 and 4:30, and how everyone else tried to come in whenever possible for them in their respective time slots. I think it was really amazing, and I'm looking forward to today, of course, as well.
Yeah, what is it about today that's particularly important?
Well, I mean, we have two really fascinating panels coming up, the morning panel and, of course, also the strategic session. But I have to say, maybe where really my attention and my heart goes even a little more is the virtual marketplace. I already looked at what's in there, what projects, what initiatives are presenting their ideas. So I think between the panels, which I'm also really looking forward to, I really want to spend a lot of time on the virtual marketplace. Yeah. And then, of course, we have the celebration. Yeah. We have a bit of the luxury to have an actual meeting for a celebration, but I hope you all will join us for our celebration as well today in the afternoon.
And when she says meeting, she actually means we'll have a glass of something. So I hope you all do it at home or wherever you are as well. All right, okay. We'll see you later, Katrin.
Have a great day, yeah.
Thank you. And it's time now for us to start our panel, start one of these two exciting panels that Katrin's just spoken about. The title of our panel is Governments and Data Economies, Unlikely Allies. And that in itself, I think, is a contentious question that we'll be getting into with our panelists. We're going to be discussing the potential of using data, big data, to better target assistance, fill gaps, and also facilitate the collaboration between the private sector and governments in not only ensuring innovation and competitiveness, but also protecting citizens' rights. We'll be looking at how the monetary and social value of data needs to perhaps be renegotiated, and how markets can function to actually be a driving factor behind the SDGs. How does this fit into our overall agenda? Well, on the one hand, obviously, it's a continuation of focus area number 4 on data for sustainable development. But it's also key in helping us answer that critical question: what's the role of international development cooperation in bringing governments and private sector together and in ensuring that the digital transformation is actually a driving force for positive change? So before we start, let's first of all make sure that we all have a common understanding, and perhaps we'll never get there, but we'll try, on what are data economies. Here's a quick film.
Every day, Alice calls for a cab using her new app. The app already knows her address, location, username, and phone number, but the cabs are clean and always on time. There are 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created each day, and it is expected that this amount will only continue to grow with new technological developments entering the market. Already, all over the world, we use our data as an exchange for different services. We type in and have access to transportation, social media, messaging, and etc. But where does the data go? A global digital ecosystem is a system in which data is gathered, organized, and exchanged by a network of vendors for the purpose of deriving value from the accumulated information. The more users give their data, the better the services. The more users will want to use the services. More data will be gathered, analyzed, and exchanged. And while the user has the immediate access to the specific service he signed up for, their data is used to create more value for the data firms and vendors. This makes the data economy highly uneven. Data gives power and advantages on the market. Companies and individuals with data have more bargaining power than individuals and other firms without data. There is even an asymmetry between data firms and the state. This high level of market concentration in the data market is likely to impede market competition, innovation, and productivity growth in the long run. Data on consumer choices also gives firms pricing advantages, enabling them to charge each customer different prices and make decisions about demand and supply. In the worst-case scenario, data firms can use the data to reduce supply for certain goods such as healthcare and welfare services. Price discrimination, price gouging, and monopoly prices will undermine the free market practices and consumer welfare. So how can regulation help preserve the innovation and economic importance of data economies while ensuring transparent and positive impact? First, we can focus on user awareness as the GDPR did. With the law and regulation, we can make sure that users are made aware of the storage and use of their data, and thus make sure that laws and regulations are human-centered and preserve the user's privacy. Common international regulation can help ensure that data is encrypted and anonymized when shared, thus protecting the data and the individuals behind the data. But how can the international regulations preserve human rights and privacy while creating a positive environment for further technological and economic development?
Great. And as I hinted at, the whole question of what are data economies and what are good data economies is something that we still need to have a lot of discussions on. And the structure of the discussion that we'll be having is, on the one hand, to look at that supranational level and then have a look at the national level. How does it work? How do we get those negotiations in place? But before we start, and before I introduce our speakers, I'd love to give the word to you, everybody who's here with us today, for two questions on why assembly. So if you go on Platts, where you are right now, to stream this, and you see underneath the streaming, you'll see a link. It's also in the chat. And if you go on this link, you can go on to our digital platform, Ysembly, and we'd love to hear your voice. I'm going to start two polls. The first poll is a confidence question on a scale of 1 to 10. We've heard a lot about the risks that are out there, and how confident are you that laws and regulations in so-called developing countries can make the data economy more human-centered? Is this something that you would say, yeah, if we have the right laws and regulations, we can actually make that change? And I'm seeing that it's the confidence has gone down. We started pretty confident, and now we're on 4.3. So this 4.2, this is less confident. We're going down and down again. Okay, there seems to be a lot of skepticism in the room, which is great. That gives us a lot to talk about on the panel. So we're hovering around 4.3, 4.7, so just under 5. Not too much confidence. Let me ask you another question, which goes to the heart of the collaboration that is, we've heard, needed between governments and the private sector. So let's try and understand a little bit more about the challenges, the hurdles. What's stopping companies and governments from collaborating and sharing data for their citizens' well-being? What do you think? No right or wrong here. Capitalism. Short answers, please. Absolutely. What else? Power, as we've just heard of. Lack of technical know-how. Fear of cybercrime. Very interesting. So this fear of the risks. Data is money, power, we're seeing again. Bureaucracy, that will be interesting to talk to. Limited know-how. So a lot of the capitalism, the dark side of capitalism, the greed, the profit, the economic interests, but also the corporation, the lack of standards, unclear governance. Most companies are not interested, we're hearing. Well, we certainly have some representatives of the private sector to speak to. Money, data security laws, greed. Okay, so it's coming down to a lot of different factors. The bad side of capitalism, right through to competence, capacity, and the need perhaps for standards. Thank you so much for that. I'll just stop that. And now it's time to introduce our wonderful speakers to you that we can discuss these and other questions with. right, so our speakers, please welcome with me. Here they are in the studio with us from their various places around the world. Patricia Adusai Poku. She's Executive Director at the Data Protection Commission in Ghana, and she'll be able to offer us the national perspective of, and also a day in the life of what it means, what the realities are of being a national data protection officer with all those risks that we've just heard. Thank you so much for being here, Patricia. And our second speaker is Bertrand de la Chapelle. He's Executive Director and co-founder of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. And Bertrand has a hot-off-the-press publication, We Need to Talk About Data, which is calling to reframe the discussion on the free flow and sovereignty of data and engage in a much-needed multi-sectoral global deliberation on data. Thank you so much for being here. Andrew Rugege is Regional Director for the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, and the representative to the African Union and the UN Economic Commission for Africa. And I know that it's at the very heart of your work to ask how can digitalization help make the lives of Africans better, no matter where they live and whatever their means. Thank you, Andrew, for being with us. Ju Yong-John is the Flux Vision International Product Manager at Orange Group's Strategy Division. And you've been involved in all of these wonderful Orange Group's Data for Development projects, which was really interesting, reaching out to 2 different African countries and asking, what is it that we could actually be supporting as Orange? And it will be interesting to see your global data industry perspective to data markets and protection. Ju Yong, thank you. And another private sector voice here, also probably interested to hear about the skepticism behind capitalism, is Aubrey Mincy, who's a serial entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Sensorit, based in South Africa, but scaling all over the world. Sensorit is an automotive innovation company that combines sensor technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and software solutions to make the driving experience more safe. And the social impact is to eliminate road accidents. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this is your wonderful panel. And in order to get us going, before we jump up to the supranational level, let me ask you, in under 45 seconds each, please, to say, what do you think are the most important challenges on what's stopping governments and the private sector from collaborating and sharing data for citizens' well-being? So the same question we just asked our participants, what do you think? I'm going to start in the opposite order of the order I introduced you in. So Aubrey, 45 seconds starting now.
Okay, let me take that. Good morning, everyone. The question is, can you please just repeat?
Yes, absolutely. So we've heard, that governments and the private sector are not collaborating enough. What's stopping them doing that? What are the challenges? Why?
I think just the speed of innovation, makes it very difficult for government to work with private sector. More so, continuously adjusting policies that accommodate, call it private sector. So I think just the speed of innovation for me, I think, makes it a little bit difficult, and until such a point where we have not really open laws, but, some standards or standardization on, certain policies around data.
All right. Thank you very much. So we have a difference in speed. Let me ask you, Ju Yong, what do you think is stopping this collaboration from really working?
I think directly, if I'm going to say, is between the misunderstanding or lack of communication between 2 parts from the beginning. I think it's an imbalance between the investment that private sector is doing, and they would like to look for recognition about the value they have created from their data. And from the government side, it's normally investment is normal. We have to progress. but that they are always struggling with what we have to protect and what we have to let grow. So the balance and the communication, I would like to say 2 words about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that's exactly, I guess, getting that balance right between protecting and letting go. Sounds scary, letting go. You know, that's the risk that we're talking about. Thank you. Andrew, what's your take on why we have this problem?
Thank you. But perhaps I should, and I do agree with you and the speaker. If you were to ask the average person in government, regulatory authority, or private sector, how many would be aware of what data economy is, what is big data, or what benefit is it to the country, what are the risks, fears, and where are the investment opportunities, and what are the returns? I think in that question, the imbalance that has just been talked about is valid, the lack of level understanding, but also the notion of what you don't know scares you. How do you protect your people? How do you make sure that you are not losing revenue? How do you make sure that the mega companies are not simply taking advantage of you? That would be what I think.
Thank you so much. So bringing this whole question of lack of awareness, lack of capacity, and then the fear takes over and leaves us going, oh, stop. Thank you. Bertrand, where do you see the main challenge?
Well, there are many challenges, and I want to turn them into a positive element and quote 3. One is to frame the questions properly and have the shared vocabulary, because most of the discussions are going at loggerheads with people putting different meanings behind the same words. The second thing is to overcome mistrust between governments at the international level and between governments and companies. There's a very deep lack of understanding, and this has already been mentioned by Andrew and others. And the third one is that we need to go beyond a siloed approach between sectors, between institutions, between topics, because there's an enormous amount of interdependencies between the different aspects. And when you act in one direction on one topic, you may have ripple effects in other domains. So framing, overcoming mistrust, and go beyond the siloed approach.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And really understand that we're talking about a system. And if you tweak one side, you're going to have an impact on another. Thank you. And Patricia, where do you see the problem? I mean, this is your daily work. I think you're muted, Patricia. I think you're muted, Patricia. Can you press the...
Sorry.
No problem.
So I think everyone has said has made very valid points for this question. But I'll speak more specifically to the African region and specifically on Ghana. I think many African, can I speak as the president of the Commissioners of Data Protection Authorities in Africa? So I represent them in the region. So I can give you an overview of what's happening in the region, and we are kind of in the answer to this question in a similar position across the region, where many governments are catching up with technological advancement, where they are very used to their manual systems of working and are now currently looking at a more digitized economy. I think the failure there is that failure to understand how to marry the benefits of digitization and to get out the maximum potential that the digitized information can yield to government. The private sector, on the other hand, is quite well advanced in the ecosystem of using digitized information to their benefit. And this whole mismatch, as my colleagues have just said, the lack of trust, the lack of understanding on the government side of what the potential of digitized information is, the private sector, the lack of understanding of the political willingness to maximize the potential that the private sector has to offer. And this whole mismatch of siloed working and separated thinking talks and separated levels of advancement and understanding is what is causing the lack of appropriate data sharing between government and private sector, more specifically in our region.
Thanks so much. And we'll be picking up on that later and being even more specific. Thanks, Patricia. So it's got a lot to do with balance. It's got a lot to do with trust or lack of trust. It's got to do with having a different understanding of the concepts, perhaps even the words that we're talking about. And I know, speaking to you before this conversation, the whole question, what's data economy? We can interpret in different ways. So let's get down to our discussion. And questions are already coming in, comments are coming in on Wisembly, and we will be doing our best to pick out as many of those as possible. What I'd like to do is start the discussion supranational levels, because we've heard in the film as well, we need that sort of regulation, we need those standards to help us also at national level. Bertrand, if I can come to your call for this global multi-stakeholder cross-sectoral debate. So presumably this is looking at the system and getting rid of the silos. But how? How can this help to really enable the human-centric exchange of data?
Well, there are a few, thank you, Natasha. There are a few elements. A first comment that I would make is that instead of using supranational, we should use the term transnational, because what is at stake is not necessarily the creation of something that is above the states, but it's something that is allowing the interoperability between different legal systems. And interoperability is a very technical term, but legal interoperability is something we need to explore. So transnational is important. When we talk about the requirements for moving forward, we need to unpack a certain number of simplistic expressions and also spontaneous incentive to go back to traditional ways of thinking about data. And that includes a dominant approach regarding the connection between data and territories, because in many cases, the location of the data is less important than who is using it, who is collecting it, and for what purpose. The second thing is that data is different from traditional goods and services, and all the value is unleashed when it is shared. And of course, there are concerns about what can be done wrong with the data, or what are the situations of abuses about data. But fundamentally, the only way to develop value on an economic, but also on a social basis, is through the sharing of data. And I want to highlight one element, which is we pay legitimately so a huge attention to personal data. But there is an enormous amount of non-personal data that is extremely important for the creation and the unleashing of value. You mentioned, and I won't come back to that, the fact that these are complex dynamic systems. And honestly, one of the obstacles is that the political environment and the international legal environment is not familiar with complex dynamic systems and the fact of unintended consequences in many spaces. So in that regard, we also need to address the drivers that trigger the measures that limit the sharing of data. And those can be about criminal aspects and access to electronic evidence, socioeconomic imbalances, security, privacy. But if we don't address those issues, we will be accumulating opportunity costs and also opportunity losses that trigger a huge number of consequences in the value chains. And so that's one of the approaches, but maybe we can come back on a few other things.
Well, I think your contribution has just triggered a question. Is there a need for an international data agency? What do you think, Bertrand?
That's a very accurate question. I don't think there is a need for one single entity, and that's the reason why we're pushing the notion of legal interoperability. And in that context, the report that you mentioned very kindly, Natasha, we need to talk about data, framing the debate between data sovereignty and free flow of data, made emerge the notion of the data sphere. What is at stake is the governance of the data sphere. And just like we've built the internet around protocols and the World Wide Web around protocols, we probably need protocols for the governance of the data sphere that will determine the future in the coming decades of our digital societies. And that's the reason why we are currently incubating inside the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network a data sphere initiative that is driven by a very positive vision addressing the issues and the challenges. But we need to have a vision of a data sphere that fosters trust, sustainability, and also well-being for all, both in the dimension of social and economic value. And this is something that will not be accomplished by only one entity or one structure. It is something that is going to be accomplished by documenting and promoting and also developing new innovative approaches in terms of tools and frameworks. And that's the challenge.
And I think it's very interesting that you're also saying not just one entity, basically on the one hand because it's too complex, but on the other, presumably we would have such a risk of having too much power in one place that maybe that's also something that we don't need. So it's more of a process and a network that you think should be controlling at supra or transnational level. Yeah.
This is a dynamic system that is transnational. And we need something that is functioning for its governance the same way the Internet and the World Wide Web are functioning, decentralized, based on protocols and a general agreement on what we want to achieve in terms of the value creation.
Okay, thank you so much. Andrew, if I could come to you, having heard about this need for a transnational set of rules and regulations, basically, and an opportunity also to reap the benefits of data. What do you think, how could that actually be realized, representing a UN organization? Is the UN the actor there, or how would you envisage this happening?
Thank you. Whether it is the UN is the agency or not, I think one thing that the UN has going for it, and that certainly the ITU has going for it, is that it is a trusted partner of not only member states, regulators, but also private sector, as all of them are members and equal members of the ITU. However, I want to go back to the issue of an equal understanding. That transnational agreement would have to be in the framework of equal understanding, and I believe that shared platforms for dialogue and co-creation of norms and solutions, for example, would be an important facilitator of effective and sustainable integration of technological innovation. But without the understanding, you cannot create what I would call mutual recognition agreements. And therefore, one part wouldn't be able to know whether the other part is actually honoring their agreement or not. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an idea. There is the European regulation, the GDPR, but that applies to Europe. Would Africa, and has any effort been made for Africans to understand what is good about it, what is bad about it, and what can be pulled out for Africans to have a recognition agreement between Europe and Africa to use the same kind of regulations. So, and I will also give you another example. When you go to Google, for example, and there are these agreements, how we use your data, how many people really understand what that agreement says? I think most big companies do not offer these, taking into consideration who is going to be looking at these agreements and agreeing to them. They are so complicated, they are legalistic, so to the extent that the regular people don't understand them. So what I'm trying to say is this: yes, we can have frameworks that are cross-border, but we need to make sure that our people understand them, our people understand the value, and can agree to them, knowing what they will do.
Right. So this sort of just saying we'll take GDPR and just give it to Africa and say, do it. I think the discussion over the course of the last 2 days has also said it's not just about making people understand, it's about making this really work in a context, in a different context. And that means involving local people, local expertise in actually coming up with the regulations themselves. And we'll come down to the national level in just a moment. Ju Yong, as a member of the private sector, if you're looking at this big question of supra or transnational regulation, but at the same time ensuring that we do let go where it's necessary, where do you see the role of the private sector? And as Andrew has just said, how can we ensure that there's a compliance?
I have captured about the way of how it has been structured by a Bertrand frame. We have to talk about the one thing, and it has to be understood by all the parts. It means, for example, let's say we have worked during COVID-19 with several European countries as well as some African countries. We have produced in the same way anonymized indicators, but those anonymized indicators were sufficiently good to provide the information to the government so they can make good decisions about the population flow. It doesn't mean we are going to trace the people individually. Unless it's necessary, the government can decide for the citizens' well-being. On the other side, when we are talking about the private sector, there's a retailers, there's a transport services providers or tourism sector. They would like to understand better their customers' needs to improve their services. So those two actors, when we are talking about we are thinking there are two different needs. I don't think so. I don't think so. Just we have to make a good point and understand where is the limit breakdown point. We need to find where is the breakdown point. That I think that is the part of conversation, the communication we need to evolve between private and public sector. So when we are talking about the no limits about data, I can already talk to you because some of the countries buying already the data from other countries. That is already happening. That has been mentioned in marketplaces. Data can be productized very easily, and without border, they can transit already. So I would like to ask all of you, to be honest. So what is going to be the future about each of us, which is going to be interpreted as a product, whatever we are doing with the data and whatever we are doing with our activities, which is going to be registered like data. So I'm in private sector, but I'm quite proud of saying it when we are trading what we are selling it. We are respecting fully GDPR. That's how we have brought our product to our African countries and the European countries, and the norms and their privacy respecting, we can make benefits of data. There is a possibility, and their understanding about the private sector that we don't need to trace individual data to get the most profits. I think it's possible. But we need to discuss each other, the private and public sector, to set where is the border.
Right. And I mean, when you ask that question, what do you want? We all need to ask ourselves this question, what do you want? I find myself going, oh my God, that's such a really difficult question. And someone's just written, actually, every citizen would need a digital representation reflecting its preferences in the digital world, a digital twin as an assistant to handle the digital overload and to ensure their rights are taken care of. So it's almost like this person, and I would agree, is saying, take me by the hand and let me have this digital twin to help me actually have my rights being taken care of. Would you agree, Zhu Yong?
I personally agree.
Yeah.
And I really believe either there is an imbalance already created in this world. So some countries have a kind of interpretation about the private right. For example, China or some of the countries, they are already exploiting AI, camera recognitions. So one side, we are thinking they are oppressing or they are getting rid of some private issues outside, but they are giving more opportunities to progress in technical side. So imbalance is already created.
Right.
But what is the best side is I really believe each of us, if we can well explain with the right vocabularies, each of us will be capable of choosing for what issue, for what subject I would like to provide my data. I want it.
I
want them to use it. Yes, like opt-in. The others could say, if I'm not so sure, I want to be helped, to choose best choice and educated. And the others, if they know what they want, they can say no or yes.
Right.
Independently. I think it's possible.
This is taking us into a really interesting conversation because we've been talking about transnational, supranational control. But what we're hearing from Zhu Yong is that we actually need the empowerment of every single person, every single citizen to actually be that control function. Bertrand, how can we, I can see you're looking a little bit skeptical. Do you think we'll ever get there? You're muted, Bertrand? You're muted? So I think if you all take care of your mute buttons when you're not speaking, turn them off and, Oh, no. I need to hear Bertrand. He's muted. Did anyone? Now you're back.
I didn't mute myself.
No.
Anyway, no, you may have noted, I completely agree. It's not that I'm skeptical.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the practicalities that we have implemented now in the GDPR and the consequences. The result is that we have now on every site that we go to choose between different options. And sometimes if you want to have a very quick look at a very small article, you're actually spending more time checking the boxes about the cookies than you are spending reading the article, which is actually a big impediment in terms of access to the information when you think about it. And I don't even mention that the result is that a certain number of sites in the US are not accessible to European citizens because some of the newspapers in the US don't want to make this information accessible. And if, for instance, Africa or other countries were to develop very respecting policies regarding privacy, for instance, it may end up reducing also the access to information. So this question of mistrust and the simplicity of this notion of a digital twin is a very important one. And I think we're all already tackling this aspect because we are checking different boxes in terms of privacy and access to data, depending on the trust we have on the sites. I will more likely say I accept for a BBC website than for something that looks a little bit fishy.
Right.
But I just want to highlight that there is no one size fit all, and that all the cooperation between private actors and public actors go both ways. There's a lot of public data that will be extremely useful for private development and development in general, just like there is a lot of private data that will be useful for governments, and it has to be developed on a case-by-case basis. I'd be very interested to listen to what can be done in the automotive sector, things in agriculture, things in the medical field, things in the financial sector. Each of the different categories of data may have different opportunities and challenges.
And we'll come to those examples just now. There's also a question here coming in from our participants saying, which of the countries where it works well, are there any at all? Zhu Yong, you have this wonderful competition where you have projects, data for development projects in the challenge. In a nutshell, what makes projects work well? Can you just give us a very brief overview?
Communication with the government. When we could help, and when I'm going to say directly, when we have to go to produce some indicators using the telecommunication data, even though we are going to say, explain methodology, anonymization, no storage of data, and as well the no traceability or extrapolated, etc. In front of us, who is going to be endorse us, who doesn't understand, who don't have the same understanding about the vocabularies, it's stopped.
Right.
Once the conversation and communication can be implemented on trust, and trust doesn't build up just a one session. Lots of conversation, time is necessary. We need to understand each other, samples. Based on that, when we have got the support of governments, where we could create indicators which can really help governments and the sanitary services, etc.
Right. So this is not going into a country saying, look, here's the solution, here's an app, do it. It's actually creating a partnership to co-create whatever the solution is that makes most sense. And we'll be coming to look at that, and we'll pick up on Aubrey's experience in just a minute. Let's go to the national level, because that's where these partnerships are going to be happening, probably also at the city level, I can imagine as well. And before we go into the discussion, let's have a video. Patricia's life as a data protection officer in Ghana.
My name is Patricia Edusei-Poku. I am 51 years young, and I'm the Executive Director Commissioner for the Ghana Data Protection Commission. When I was 21 years old, I started working in the arena of collecting data on the front line for government in the United Kingdom. From that space, I was asked to become the head of data protection for the Olympics, London 2012. That gave me a global exposure. And so from the Olympics, I became the Global Data Protection Director for World Vision International for 105 countries. Now in Ghana, my daily challenge is about enabling and empowering my staff to build some capacity, to retain them, to get them enough understanding of the role and the mandate that we have to deliver in order to support the nation. And what tends to happen is, as we build the capacity internally, they are then stolen to a private sector institution or a higher payer. So my daily challenge is to challenge and motivate the staff of the Commission to want to stay. Interoperability is a very important word in delivering the mandate of a Data Protection Commission, to build relationships that helps us to negotiate the path forward for delivering the data protection requirement as a regulator. In Ghana, for example, what I have done is written to my peer regulators and asked them to make data protection an eligibility criteria in their own sector. We have scaled up this kind of operation to across the borders and done the same with our peer regulators in other countries who will also connect with us to solve data protection problems and issues that cross the borders of Ghana. We have also worked with the private sector in various ways to support them to use their creativity and innovation in ways that benefit the general ecosystem, and supported them in implementing their privacy programs, and also partnered with them where applicable to do some work in the ecosystem. We have so many different groups that support the agenda of the Commission. Apart from government itself wanting to protect and safeguard the processing of data across the nation, we also have NGOs, campaign groups that are based on human rights that wants to support the rights of individuals. We have NGOs that support capacity building of people like my staff or other private sectors to train people and to improve awareness in the country and beyond. Across Africa, we have groups like the Smart Africa that wants to improve the digitization of Africa, such as improving our awareness of artificial intelligence, for example. We have other philanthropists like eBay's philanthropic arm, Omida, that will support us to do conferences and roadshows, delivering national awareness. And so we work with different groups and other groups that are across the borders to support the improvement of awareness in the country and beyond. The vision is that we want the privacy to be respected as a fundamental human right across Africa. And we are hoping that in the way that we are working collaboratively across the region with African Union and the key bodies in Africa will improve the knowledge of what data protection is supposed to achieve and to safeguard data, the selection of appropriate technology and the use of artificial intelligence, big data, digitized information in the ecosystem will be done according to the way it's done in the global north, Europe and America, and then it will get to a stage where Africa is on par with our international community in the way data is processed.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Patricia. And it's great that you're here with us too, and not just in the video. So going back to what you said before about trust, about the lack of trust being at the heart of the problem, is the job that you're doing, this multisectoral approach that you're also adopting, is that leading to more trust? I think it may be our guys who need to unmute you, because now you're on. Now you're on.
Okay, thank you. First time I've seen that video too.
It's great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, to your question, which I've completely missed out now. What's the question again? Trust. Yes. So in Ghana specifically, we have a team that we have been using around trust for the past 2 years, just to bring that word to people's mind all the time as they collect and process data. The national agenda is called the transformation agenda, transforming the nation to a digitized economy. And so what we say in the Commission is that we need the 3 T's to build trust between ourselves and the data controllers that we work with, to build trust between individuals, empowered individuals, and their accountable data controllers, as my colleagues have just talked about, and trust between similar parallel entities, which would then lead into the transparency that is needed in the ecosystem in general to allow for the necessary transformation that we all need globally. So trust leading to transparency is what we've been looking at in Ghana. And we do this by pushing data controllers to be more open about how they collect data, where they store their data, who is having access, and the quality of the data, how long they're keeping it, anything to reassure the empowered individuals, and opening up to accept their complaints and exercising of their rights to adjustments or objection or right to whatever other rights that has been accepted globally for data subjects, allowing that to work smoothly, that enables the necessary transparency between individuals and users of data in the data markets. This is what will lead to the transformation that we are all looking for. So we call it the 3 T's strategy.
Thank you. So I can imagine that there's also a lot of prejudice, though, between the private sector and government. So you've talked about reassuring people whose data is being used. But how about getting that getting that working relationship with the private sector. We heard from Aubrey, it's sometimes a question of speed. We've heard from Bertrand, it's sometimes a question of actually speaking a different language, right? So how do you get that relationship with the private sector?
So the private sector is like my colleagues have just said, is not very aligned with government in terms of. So I'm not sure if my camera is okay, but
we can see you very well.
Okay, so the private sector is struggling to get government to be aligned with their pace of innovation and understanding of what data, the value of data and its uses and its potential. And as you can see, government is struggling to get to the level where technology has enabled the world to get to. In Africa, we have so many challenges, and Ghana specifically is going through this challenge too, where we are not able to interpret the requirements of the international standards clearly and fairly in our ecosystem. If you look at the barriers that we have here, we have barriers to literacy, lack of awareness, penetration of internet to all areas that are applicable, especially in rural areas, and access to internet, where internet is available to individual access to. All these complexities in our ecosystem makes it even more challenging to align private sector to government, where an individual who has very creative technology, innovative ideas, has a barrier to cross to get it into the face of the political or the key decision makers or the policy level decision makers. So these are struggles that we are dealing with as a supervisory authority that wants to enable a proper use of data.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll come back in a minute to discuss what needs to be done and also how perhaps international development cooperation can support that. But Aubrey, if you were sitting in one of the government offices responsible for data protection and letting go, as an entrepreneur, what would you do?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so I think I mean that's quite a seat for one. So I think from my side, I think this point has been echoed in this panel for like over and over, which is just ensuring that the data owners, which is like a regular man or like a regular citizen, they have absolute control over their data. And of course, ensuring that companies that are gathering this data are very much transparent to the end user, which is the data owner, as to what kind of data is being gathered of them and do they agree or not, and just putting in place, tools to ensure that, a lot around data is demystified, because a lot of people still do not understand what it even means when we talk about data, like protection acts. I mean, South Africa recently, there's been a buzz about POPIA Act, which is the Personal Information Act. But if you try to hold a normal conversation with someone around the very same act that's been buzzed over, people don't actually understand what it means and its implications. So I think just making sure that a regular person, have a proper grasp of what, like data is and who are they in this ecosystem of data, like as a player, because users are very, or like regular people, like as a matter of fact, are actually the key main factor or key main player in the data ecosystem, because they're the ones that allow the generation of data. So having them understand, that, and giving them absolute control over their data, and just better information in terms of, just the theme of data overall. Yeah.
Now, I'd love to give our audience and our participants the opportunity of understanding where you see the business, the economic, and also the development potential for Africa, for African entrepreneurs in using data for their businesses. So just let us have your vision. How could businesses like yours really help African development?
Yes. So that's so interesting that you mentioned that. So in South Africa, one of the things that my company is doing, Censor It, I think there was a point mentioned earlier that data and value from data is not only on personal data. And we hold the same view as well within my company, that you find, for example, infrastructure data is as valuable, like physical infrastructure data, as personal data. So I think for me, what that means, it somewhat introduces new models, whereby we're able to put or even provide services to consumers at lower prices, because of the cost absorption, because if you're able to derive value from multiple ways, you can actually, if you are a fair, if we call it that, business person, you are able to absorb some of the costs that would typically be carried by the user, or some of the cost in the value chain, that's giving cheaper products. But what I find very interesting, what we've started doing in our company, is that oftentimes when we think infrastructure, when we think maintenance of infrastructure, people, oftentimes feel very powerless. You see this in many parts of the world, where there's cracks, streets, there's street lights that are not working, there's traffic lights that are not working, and people oftentimes feel that they can't do anything about it. So now we've developed a technology where you can use your phone to basically take a picture, for example, of a pothole, and we then run our AI and machine learning models to basically detect what that is. And then we're able to, for example, do the depth calculation of that particular pothole. And then we are able to provide that information to government, for government to then start automating some of their supply chain. For instance, create a purchase request based on that particular, reported incident by a regular citizen. So in that way, we are somewhat, putting people, in a way where they can somewhat influence government, right? Or people having that ability to communicate their issues as citizens, to the government directly, using the data that they're gathering. And in the very same way, we as a company can take a responsibility of sharing that value we derive from that data with that very same user. So now that changes the, economic dynamics for that particular individual. So I think there's, yeah. And
I'm so pleased that we can hear your voice, but every now and again you sort of get a little bit stuck. And we do have to say that you are calling in from a German internet connection, just in case anyone is wondering. I think that's absolutely fantastic, because what you're allowing individuals to do is to be data agents, empowered data agents, without really understanding that they were that. And that perhaps will help to get rid of this fear that we were talking about before.
Absolutely, because that fear oftentimes, for instance, when you think of Facebook, when you think of all these platforms that we have, that have been somewhat scrutinized where personal data is concerned, I think that scrutiny is merely, well, not merely, but one of the drivers is the fact that there is no value being shared. People feel cheated, that you're able to create this enormous value from a user, or rather from a platform that is user-generated content, meaning that without the user giving in the data or that content into the platform, there is no value for the business. But at the very same time, these very same companies don't rope that value back to the end user. Hence, now people will have mixed feelings about their data being, gathered by companies. So I think the moment us as startups, as well as just corporate companies, we are able to not be selfish with the value we're deriving from the data we get from the people. We might get a very different reception, from the people.
So part of the business model you're saying has got to be, there's a what's in it for me for everyone who's providing their data. So just to recap where we are, I think we've talked, and there was a question on this, what sort of data are we talking about? Let me read it to you because it's great. I very much think that individual personal data should be shared very carefully with a strict legal framework in place. That's what I heard from Zhu Yong as well. Statistical data, anonymized, please share. This is what I've heard from Bertrand. Andrew, when you hear about all this potential for African entrepreneurs to scale up, and as I said, Aubrey is currently in Germany. This is what we want to be seeing, right? What considerations do you think International Development Corporation and international organizations need to be? Which thought processes do they need to be having to ensure that potential is achieved?
Thank you, and thank you, Aubrey. Wonderful to know what you are doing. I think from the point of view of what should be done internationally, I think there ought to be a kind of getting together of the minds of Germany and Kenya, and to make sure that this entrepreneurial spirit is not only of advantage to some and not advantage of the other. As we are talking, I just received an email talking about the FCC in the United States and regulations pertaining to robocalls, which will affect African telco companies and their customers roaming. I think it's not fair when one part of the world can impose regulations that have not been discussed in any way and are going to affect, for example, African countries. Our members are calling for help. What do we do here? The regulation has been issued. Can you mitigate? So in terms of this transnational, I believe the question of data protection, data use permissions needs to be discussed at that level of those countries and regulators that are of different countries, so that the entrepreneurs do not suffer. The issue of what is in it for me is very important. I think I had asked it already. When you have regulations that are favorable to some places and unfavorable to others, and my call, and I think we'll be addressing this a bit earlier for international organizations and UN organizations, is to try and address that issue of the not so developed countries having these bigger regulations affect them, right. And they haven't even been discussed with them. On top of that, also, I think what we are doing as ITU, we also have databases from different collected from different countries. For example, the ICTI, but we are giving value back to the countries. We can give a snapshot of what exists in the country in terms of connectivity, for example, in terms of price baskets, in terms of accessibility. So the issue of maybe when you monetize something, it is difficult to make sure that the people who supplied the data that you've just monetized receive monetary value, but at least you can use that data and give them some benefit that they are not able to develop themselves. And that is what we are trying to do in the ITU as well, to make sure that whatever data is collected is not only protected, but it can produce value for the member states as well.
Thank you. And Zhu Yung, I'd love to hear your take on that question of monetization and giving back, or what's in it for me, in just one moment. But Patricia, how do you, for example, as someone not only representing your country, but representing data commissioners all over Africa, how do you get a seat at that international table? Because we're hearing from Andrew that it's not fair. I think Patricia is also muted.
Thank you. That's a very great question. We more recently have been included a lot, more than before, more than the last 3 years ago, where Africa did not actually even have a voice on the international roundtable of discussion. I remember in Europe, I had to intervene when I found myself at the table, not representing Africa, but in a different capacity, pushing for Africa to say that we are gathering ourselves together to also be part of this active eco space. We have a voice, we want to use it. And following that discussion, Africa was given its own panel in the European Data Protection Conference that usually happens in Brussels. We were given a panel to discuss issues that focuses on Africa, not necessarily African panelists only, but discussing matters that is focused on Africa. That was a very great advancement for Africa. And we want more of that to happen in the different fora that is available on the global North landscape. But I believe that there's a lot more effort being made, which is quite fair now than before. This particular discussion we are having is of similar nature, where Africa has been roped in as an equal panelist to discuss issues that impacts the world. So I think there's a better opening and involvement and inclusion for Africa now than there was before, from my experience.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, and your question is how do we get more of this happening? I'm quite loudmouth and I really speak about it whenever I get the opportunity, and asking, screaming that we are here, involve us. And there's a lot of reaching out that happens from here. In 2019, I, on behalf of the African Network, held the very first regional conference in Ghana, where we invited the international community to come into Africa to hear what is happening. That was a very successful conference that maxed out our international conference center. We had more than 300 participants from the international privacy community attending in Africa, including the UN Secretary for Privacy, UN Special Personality for Privacy, Joe Kanatachi, was there. We had Council of Europe represented. We had the European Commission. We had many European countries like the UK ICO represented. We had our American FIC attending, and many of our international community counterparts from both the private and public sector attended to get an overview of Africa, the reality of what is happening, our state of maturity and the challenges. And we had a very successful 5-day conference in Ghana. And thank God it happened in 2019, because the following year we had the pandemic, and I don't think we can have it like that for quite a while yet to come. We had 1,400 people participating in this conference. I think we need more of such happening.
Exactly, because it's not just like having an African forum as a sort of side event. It's being the host of an international collaborative
It was amazing.
meeting. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Zhiyong, I said I'd love to come back to you talking about how can customers have the feeling that giving my data doesn't just make sense because maybe prices will go down sometime, but that there could be some direct benefit. And we have a question here as well. Exactly how does the individual benefit instead of, for example, insurances, which will exploit the data even against the individual's benefits? So how does the individual benefit? And is this something that Orange Group, for example, is also looking at?
From the point of view of individual data, how they can benefit about the return of their own data, I would like to say indirectly.
Right.
It's very awkward to say answer by another answer, but how you are going to evaluate your own data, how much importance you are giving your own data. When the government, when the companies would like to see is not only you, but the main value is the grouping of the data.
Right.
It's the tendency of data which has a more value than each individual data. That is the point you have to got. I would like to say that data, one by one, maybe it's our important data. So I'm going to say it's very important to me. Yes, it is. But when it comes down to create the infrastructure where we have to transport the system, or it comes down one retailer where I have to my use store to gather more people. Those kind of business mind and really offer something which is not just target you, but the grouping of the interest. Interest about individual value can be interpreted. You are going to have a new shop. You can shop. Instead of going for 20 or 25 minutes by walk to reach one shop, that shop will pop up just 5 meters from your house. That maybe would be the individual return, the return of investment of your own data. I would like to say it like that.
That's really interesting. And there's another question that I want to put to you, because maybe hearing your answer to that, you wouldn't agree. Anonymization of data may limit transparency and ensuring the truthfulness of the data. Would you agree?
Data comes from machine. I don't know if I will someday to say that, but data don't lie.
Oh,
sorry to say that, but when data lie, because people's intervention, the understanding, manipulation could result something wrong. Machine commanded and controlled up to now by us for this moment. But some of the artificial intelligence is going very fast, as Audrey said, innovation is very fast, but still. So I would like to say in that way that truthfulness, I think we are not hiding that. But I truly saying that from the data monetization point of view, respecting the GDPR fully, there's some of the points we cannot answer when we needed to go down to the precision. Who has used what kind of a transport mode from home to work? That is, for me, violation about the tracing one individual. Okay, so that is the limit about each of us should be aware when we are going to interpret the good use of data. That's it.
Thank you so much. And I'm so pleased that you said data can't lie, because you could hear, even in the studio here, everyone's going like, wow. Whew. And we're getting some reaction as well. On the one hand, you can use data very, very easily to lie. So it's very easy to produce alternative facts. And also a question, perhaps, Bertrand, how about biases in data? Because what this group here has been talking about over the last 2 days is also the gender data gap, for example. The fact that we maybe are not collecting enough data to actually have that representativity.
I think there's one answer that is going even more broadly than the question of data, and it connects directly to the question of participation and the question of voices. We cannot address those issues without the voices of all the different actors, and that includes African countries and others, but also small companies as well as the large ones. And so the question of inclusion is an absolutely fundamental one, and bringing the different actors, as Patricia mentioned, in the debate that goes for Africa, but that goes for small companies, and it's not always easy because it takes time to participate in those things. But that's one of the purposes of the project that we are launching right now in participation and in partnership with GIZ, which is the successor for Africa of a report that we've done with the European Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, on a regional status report. And it will be a 2-year project to organize precisely the gathering of information, the dialogue, and the interaction with Africa in the continuation of a conference that we organized with the African Union last year. But I want to pick, if you allow me, Natasha, two quick things that came from the discussion. The first one is when thinking about what Patricia was saying, and Andrew as well, regarding the participation of African countries in regulation. The problem is that today, as I said at the beginning, transnational is the new normal, and the national regulation has to take into account an international environment, either because the countries are subject to the extraterritoriality of other regions, and that was the case with the GDPR, but any regulation at the national level needs also to take into account how it applies to operators that are located outside of the territory. So it is a mental shift from what used to be regulation in the past years or the past decades, where the national regulation was mostly applicable to national operators. Here, there is an interpenetration, and it makes the complexity of the landscape even bigger. And Andrew was mentioning the question of agencies and the role of the ITU. What is interesting and fascinating in this regard is that there is an enormous amount of agencies, just intergovernmental agencies, that are relevant for those issues. It touches the OECD, the Council of Europe, UNESCO, and I can continue the list forever. So the key question is how to make them talk to one another, interoperate with the private sector.
Oh, well, we've lost Bertrand. I can't hear you anymore. I'm sure it's not yours.
No, it's not mine. Do you?
You're back.
We can hear.
Back. So sorry. So I was saying this is why we're talking about this global dialogue that is across sector, etc. But I want to finish with one point, which is very striking when I was listening to Drew and Aubrey. And the question of the benefit for users, I think Aubrey gives a fascinating test case because there is a sort of mutualization of the benefit. What is happening is that he produces a private service that probably has its own business model. But if I understand correctly, the data that is then provided to the state is actually allowing the state to upgrade the infrastructure without having the need to put on the ground thousands of people who control whether there's a pothole, whether there's a lamp that is not functioning. And so, in a certain way, part of what we're discussing today makes me think that we are looking at a feedback loop here. Mm-hmm. Where basically the benefit of sharing data between private actors and public actors is actually using the state or the good agencies in the state as the mutualization tool for providing back the benefit of the sharing of the data in the first place. And I want to make a pun in the end. The title of this discussion was Unlikely Allies. I think companies and governments are not unlikely allies. They're absolutely, completely natural and necessary partners in leveraging the maximum value. I hope just that they are thinking of them in this way, which right. I don't think is the case at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And we've seen that there's a lot of work to do. But Aubrey, there's some questions coming up about ethics. So how about ethics in AI? I'm a bit afraid by this uncritical trust in AI. What space is there for humans anymore? I mean, how can, if we hand over to smart organizations like you to bring these mutual benefits back, how can we be sure that really there's not going to be any harm happening down the road?
So I think on that note, I think it's a classical situation, like way back in the days, before AI and machine learning were a thing. There used to be a very prominent saying in the software community that, like software works in a way that if you give it garbage in, it will give you garbage out, So like very same way, some AI have been reported having to create their own language, their own code base, while at the very same time, I think it's all about what are the procedures put in place while generating that code or that, like model, that AI model, and I think it's all very much dependent on the fact that you need to put the right people behind the keyboard, people that actually, yes, and I think, unfortunately, that one you can't really, future-proof that much. You can, of course, put in some policies, some data, like protection plan, either internally within the company, to make sure that there's, like a set of rules that people follow when, generating the IP that, of course, interact with the normal person, that, either through a phone or like whatever device they use. So I think, yeah, I'm not sure if Natasha was able to, answer the question well.
Well, I think what you're saying is that it's also a responsibility of the companies to make sure
Absolutely.
that you do no evil, to sort of misquote Google. So
Yes.
we need to be demanding of companies that they perhaps show that ethical background to what they're doing, because, as you say, garbage in, garbage out could also apply to AI.
Absolutely.
We're coming to the end. We've got another couple of minutes, and there are some more questions here that I'd love to put to the panelists. And I'll just start with one. And the question says, quickly. So could you just quickly say something on how reaching the SDGs and using, therefore, green, sustainable resources, especially within digitalization, are part of your work already? Perhaps, Zhu Yong, to what extent does green, like the environmental side of the equation, what sort of place does that have in digitalization?
I'm going to put down the limits about my perimeter, because I'm a product manager about telecommunication data, which come down to the statistic indicators, which can be a big baseline, can serve like Audrey, to be honest. So he can do the calculation, AI learning. So the basic base of the data we are producing. So putting out that clearly, I'm going to expose you some of the cases, the telecommunication indicators level, statistic indicators level, how can serve SDG. Some of the cases, if you are going to understand the flow of the population in a certain pattern, so from A or to B, a certain period of time of the year, you can see the more population move or less population move depending on the hours. Okay? That serve how the public services should prepare the common transport service. That is one example. Second example, I'm going to for EV, electric vehicles, for example. In that case, we are going to provide some of the certain type of a flow, amount of volume of a flow, the different axes of France or Spain or Belgium, where we are operating already, or even African countries, or even for certain other countries. We can provide indicators how the people move frequently and recurrently. In that case, with their automotive data, they are coming from their EV companies or the gas station companies. They can cross over to find out the right points where they have to set up their recharging bonds, looking into their return of investment. So I wouldn't say the one data could give the perfect solution for the SDG, but using the data in a way we would like to read it to, that is our human-centered vision, which has to influence how we are going to use the data for SDG. That is what I would like to say, because the data sources, there are several, and the other part has touched me a lot is Patricia said, talented people she wants to retain. Okay, those talented people can create AI, can create the goal which are oriented to the SDG, so data can be used smartly and can have a good willing object. That's my point.
Thank you so much. And I guess when we're talking about the environmental impact, a positive environmental impact, it's similar to what Aubrey was saying when he said, we can reduce costs. You can reduce waste. You can make sure that we don't lose the energy, for example, on that one example. Someone has just asked, this is very interesting, is this data anonymized available? Zhu Yung?
Which one?
Which one? Of the projects that you've just explained.
Yeah, regarding the data we are producing, yes, they are all anonymized and extrapolate to the total population for each country. That's why I was emphasizing our data analytics we are providing, which is non-traceable, and there are no individual data in it.
And just a quick question that you're going to hate. Is it free?
No.
Exactly. Isn't this one of the...
So I'm private.
Isn't this one of the questions that we also need to be broaching very quickly? Let me go to Patricia. Do governments sometimes expect data from the private sector to be free and available and just, handed over on a silver platter?
Yeah, I'm intervening a lot between government and the private sector, where the government in Ghana especially like to demand for information from the private sector, and they always to block the government say, well, we can't give it to you for data protection reasons, and it ends up on my desk as a dispute. And yeah, there are proper ways of requesting for information with legitimate grounds that gives you access to data. And I'm glad that some private sector institutions understand the requirements enough to say, no, government, you can't just ask for the information because you're a government. You have to ask, you have to explain the legitimate grounds, you have to show whether you have consent, or what your justification is for collecting it, how much you actually need to support the work you're doing. And we go through the process of shielding the private sector a little bit by controlling how much data the government can just collect just in case they need it. And now the world has moved on that you can't just collect because it's all interesting stuff and we could do all sorts of things. You need to be able to justify. We always explain the data set and justifying the request for each attribute and for what purpose and how that solves the and many often in many situations we end up cutting out and limiting the data that is collected from private sector for state level use. And there's always the need to do data minimization and protecting individuals in that process.
Right. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, there are lots more questions here. And I can imagine that actually rooting around on and looking at further information which will be made available will help us to answer them, like how is the anonymized data collected in Aubrey's projects, et cetera, et cetera. So please leave as much information as you can with us that we will be passing on to our colleagues. This has been an absolutely riveting discussion, and I'm sure that all the colleagues who've been working on this question of data for development over the last 2 days are going, wow, thank you so much. I'd like to thank you very much, all of our wonderful panelists, and everyone here in the studio, please give us a round of applause. We're not very many here in the studio, as you can hear. And let's just remember that we're talking about natural partners here. We're talking about partners who may need to talk to each other quite a bit in order to get a common understanding and also the trust that is needed. But they're the natural allies also to empower the individual to become the person who's responsible and also able to control their own data, because we've seen there are massive opportunities coming from Africa and elsewhere in the world. Thank you so much, and see you in an hour, everyone else, as we move forward.
Thank you.